welcome to the Afghanistan Project Podcast, where we delve into some of the most pressing concerns facing the people of Afghanistan, highlight individuals from around the world and across the political spectrum who have stepped up to render assistance to our Afghan allies, and raise the voices of the many people who have been endangered by the Taliban's oppressive rule. I'm Beth Bailey. My co-host Michael Cook had to step away for the day, so today I get the honor of talking with the head of Project Dynamo, Bryan Stern, about the ongoing efforts his group has undertaken to bring more than 3,000 people out of Afghanistan since 2001. After responding to the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, Bryan Stern subsequently saw combat with both the U.S. Army and the U.S. Navy before retiring as a lieutenant commander. Bryan is a recipient of the Purple Heart Medal, and he's been recognized by high-level personnel throughout the U.S. government for his extensive work in hostage rescue, counterterrorism, counterproliferation, and unconventional warfare. His work through Project Dynamo has extended from the U.S. to Southeast Asia to Eastern Europe, as his organization has responded to crises when the U.S. government has been unable or unwilling to provide assistance. Bryan, thanks so much for joining us today. And for our listeners who are just tuning in via audio, there might be a lag between my questions and Bryan's answers because Bryan is currently in Ukraine.
Thanks for having me, Beth. Excited to be here.
I'm really excited to have you. You've done some really amazing work in Afghanistan. So I guess my first question to kick us off tonight is, at what point during the withdrawal process did you realize that there was a need to get people out of Afghanistan?
Dynamo, I found a Dynamo in my living room. We all watched the C-17 on TV where the Afghans fell off the plane and died. When it was all happening, everyone on TV was comparing the fall of Afghanistan to the fall of Saigon and Vietnam, which, if you understand history, makes absolutely no sense. There's not a historical parallel there whatsoever. An embassy. So while everybody was talking about Saigon, I was a 9/11 first responder, and it brought me back to 9/11, watching innocent people fall to their deaths. Kind of from this, and by extension, as a result of the same people, the same threat, and that was within 3 weeks or so of the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So it struck a chord with me. How are we, 20 years later, we've made no progress. People are still jumping to their deaths as a better idea. The Taliban are back in power. We've made no progress or maybe even backwards to some extent. So I felt compelled to act. And never did I think that almost 2 years later, we'd still be talking about it. That was never the plan. It was supposed to be Dynamo. When I found it, it was supposed to be a few week kind of, it was like a dude's trip was the idea. But we packed our stuff, we deployed forward, and we've been forward deployed pretty much the entire time since that moment.
That's amazing. And so I've heard that from so many of our guests on the show and just the people that I've interviewed since probably November 2021 when I started covering post-withdrawal Afghanistan and wondered how long this period would last. It's just kept going, and I don't think anyone planned for it to be this long of an effort. How did you go about when you entered Afghanistan? Where did you head to, and what was your plan immediately?
Our initial plan, which we kind of we half worked out, the other half didn't, was the whole world was focused on Kabul. I didn't want to do that. Wherever people are is where I don't want to be. It's kind of how I've always been. So everybody was looking at Kabul. I wanted to focus on the northern corridor through Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. I have very deep relationships with key Afghan and tribal folks in the north. General Dawson is one, Governor Leppard is another, who are friends to this day. The idea was get to Uzbekistan, get to Tashkent, make our way south to Termez, break open the northern corridor, which is how we invaded Afghanistan back in the day, and start doing work. And that's more or less what we did.
Oh, that's incredible. So you weren't even using, because a lot of groups use them Mazar to evacuate people. So your plan was just to completely leave out the airport angle and kind of take a land route of egress.
Yeah, so we did both. We did
Okay.
we did air stuff and land stuff, and a lot of groups um, had some success, but mostly failure, frankly. And a lot of that was because they weren't actually on the ground. They were coordinating and facilitating and trying to do the right thing, trying to help out, but they were not boots on ground. And because the situation was so complicated, um, that left them in a position where they have to largely rely on strangers and strange people to do things. There was a group that in a signal thread maintained that they had a safe house in Kabul, December 2021. Well, because we were on the streets in Kabul 2021, I was personally there. I actually go. I don't do it from my couch. Where I'm going to do the work. When we went to their safe house, it was actually being run by the Taliban, and they didn't even know.
Holy
And so there's a
cow.
lot of that kind of stuff. So we've never been that way. We've always been very touchy feely. We've always been on the border, on the street, in Kabul, and other places, on the ground, ourselves doing our thing.
How did you work that out? I mean, with the Taliban on the ground, how were you able to safely be in Kabul and doing that work to evacuate people from the country?
It's not safe. It's scary.
Did you ever have any close encounters that kind of brought that point home?
uh, yeah, we uh, lots of people were trying to get planes on the ground and, more importantly, off the ground. Dynamo was the first organization to land a plane and take off the whole thing in September 2021. When we did that, and that was Kabul, not even Mazar. Um, Things are dicey. there's, every one of these operations are very scary for everybody.
That's incredible. What I think I've read from your site that there were 1,700 people that you were able to get out in those early days. Um, what populations were you primarily helping? Were these people who had maybe special immigrant visas underway, or I understand that a lot of the people you're helping are American citizens and legal permanent residents as well.
So we've kind of gone through a few different phases for Afghanistan specifically. We've gone through a few different phases. Before General Donahue and the U.S. military left, it was if you can get to Kabul, get to the airport. Let's help you get inside the walls of the airport. If you can't, get north, and we'll see if we can get you across the border. That kind of thing. That was a true statement while the U.S. military was still there, right? Then on the 30th of August or 31st, whatever it was, U.S. military leaves. General Donahue is the last American soldier or whatever to be in Afghanistan, and now U.S. mil is gone. Taliban's in charge. That's the way it's going to be. Not up to me. It's just a fact of life. So once that happens, that was a whole new phase. And that's where you see a lot of groups really kind of fizzle, because up until that moment, it was get everyone to the airport, get everyone into the airport. The goal, right? Once the mechanism to get people out was not the U.S. military, that was kind of the end of the show for the vast majority of veteran groups like ours, right, who are trying to do the right thing. That demographic for us was people up until that moment were people that we knew personally, or Americans, or green card holders, or allies, or Afghans who we could independently verify, validate, and vet were good, and that had worked with us. The vast majority of people that were in those early days that the U.S. military evacuated were the wrong people. So not that they deserve to stay in Afghanistan, but they didn't help us. So from a priorities perspective, then what happens is the U.S. military leaves, and now there's this moment of like, now what? And now what do we do? And we start to prioritize people into different tranches based off the threat to them. American citizens come first. Green card holders are a close second, very close second, and British and German, British and French, and other countries, all those folks, and then also the Afghan allies that had fought with us and worked with us, politicians were
That's a significant portion of people, and so uh, can you explain why there are so many people in those categories after the withdrawal? I think it's been amazing to look at the media coverage of how many American citizens are left in Afghanistan, or how many green card holders are left in Afghanistan even today. Can you tell our listeners why they're still there after the withdrawal, and still there now, even though we are continuing, the U.S. government is continuing to slowly evacuate all these people?
So there's two big reasons. One is they were left behind. They shouldn't have been left. Um, when Secretary of State Blinken and Secretary of Defense General Austin, they got on TV in September 2021 and said there's about 100 Americans left in Afghanistan. That was on the 14th or 15th or 16th or so of September. About 100 hours later, I delivered 122 to Chicago. What's the likelihood that teeny tiny Dynamo has more than 100% market share of all Americans left in Afghanistan that DoD and state are tracking? Probably not, right? So, so the other reason why is so part of it is they were just left behind, and they shouldn't have been. The other reason why people have stayed or are there or whatever, the visa process is so ineffective or broken. It's very common to have an American citizen, daddy with a green card mommy, and the kids' paperwork not right, and therefore they have to make a choice: stay with their kids or leave them behind and hope for the best. And then you leave your children. That's a very common story that we hear pretty much every week.
That's an incredibly hard decision, I can imagine. And I've seen a number of cases, too, in my coverage of these issues of LPRs and American citizens who came here on the SIV program. These are interpreters. Every single one who's talked to me has been an interpreter, served with our combat forces, put their lives on the line. One of them still has the scars from surviving a suicide attack. And actually was there and witnessed Kyle Carpenter leap atop a grenade in Helmand province, for which he was then awarded the Medal of Honor. So these people have worked beside our forces. They've come here, they've become American citizens, and then they have made the choice to return to Afghanistan because their family members were left behind, and they wanted to kind of force the State Department's hand to evacuate them and their family members whom they'd sponsored for citizenship. And so I've seen in some cases the State Department has evacuated them and their parents, but not their siblings. And I wondered, have you run into any cases like that with Project Dynamo? Because some will not be evacuated. The State Department refuses to evacuate them, and they kind of have to go through some other methods of leaving.
Yeah, we hear this and deal with this constantly.
Are there any particular stories that
the process.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead. You were saying the process of.
Yeah, the process, the visa process, the whole thing is um, broken. It, we're not set up now the way they should have been set up then. And there's thousands of people. We did an operation in Jalalabad in January this past year, just like a few weeks ago, and it's the father is from Texas and is in Texas. The mother and a couple of kids, 5 kids, got stuck in Jalalabad. She has, I think, 8 kids. I think 2 don't have papers, so she leaves behind the oldest and the 2 that don't have papers as a choice. And everyone else comes to America. We got them out, but the other 2, I can't bring them here legally. So what do I do? And this is just one family, and the kids are young. And part of the thing is that the U.S. Embassy remains closed, which is stupid, and sends a terrible message of weakness. So if you're that family, what are you supposed to do? There's nowhere to go. There's no way to submit the paperwork in a efficient way. What do you do?
When you pull a family like that out, I know that when care team people are pulling Afghans out, they have to go wait for processing in Doha or somewhere else. Is that what's happening to your families too? When you pull them out, do they have to go through that same process?
SIVs go through Doha.
Okay.
We tend to focus. Again, we're donor funded. Our website's projectdynamo.org. We're entirely volunteer. We're all donor funded. I'm not going to put an American or a green card holder in a refugee camp waiting for the State Department to figure it out. I'm not going to do that. So we do Kabul to CONUS. So we usually we fly direct from Kabul to a third country to for a few hours, and then into America, usually JFK. So we don't go to Doha. There's no extra processing. I'm an American. I can come home. I don't need to be checked. I'm good.
That's incredible. It's an asset for all these people too, who, especially anyone I've talked to who's in Doha has gotten stuck there, has been miserable in the midst of processing that seems kind of interminable. It doesn't end. I've had one family who was stuck there. They were supposed to be stuck for 8 weeks, and I believe they were stuck for almost 6 months. So I'm glad that at least this is one hurdle that these families who should never have been left behind do not have to go through, waiting for processing. So you're in Ukraine right now. About a year ago, I spoke with a number of NGOs who had been Afghan focused. That was their entire mission, and that had kind of made them experts on how to respond quickly to an evolving situation. Is that kind of how you got started in Ukraine as well, because of the expertise that you developed in Afghanistan, or was that did you get in through a different mechanism?
Well, I mean, I've been doing hostage rescue and unconventional warfare for 25 years, mostly in United areas for the government. So my skill set isn't honed over the last 18 months or something. You know, we're good at this because we're good at this for a long time. We got active in Ukraine because of a donor. We had a donor that had given us money out of generosity for Afghanistan, and he came to us and he basically said, look, you're doing God's work, you're doing good stuff, you're rescuing Americans, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. I appreciate that. That's awesome. That's great. But honestly, I don't really care about Afghanistan. I don't know any Afghans. I definitely don't know any Afghan Americans. I really don't have any connection there. However, I'm watching this thing on TV, the guy says, and I have friends in Ukraine. Is Dynamo going to Ukraine? And I kind of pushed back a little bit. I kind of pushed back a little bit. We were busy in Afghanistan. We still are doing things in Afghanistan. As I mentioned, like 8 weeks ago, we did an operation in Afghanistan. I bounced between both all the time. Um, but it occurred to me that we were really successful where nobody else was, frankly, in Afghanistan at the tail end of a mess. And I thought to myself, how successful could we be if we get if we can get to a place before the war, before it's a mess, set things up the right way, and build the right kind of clandestine infrastructure, both human and physical, and kind of set things up early in advance in the event of things going wrong, which I knew was going to happen. I predict on live TV. I predicted the day that the war would start, and pretty much within like an hour and a half, 2 hours is when I found it. Pretty good. Um, I said February 24th before breakfast. This was landing at 5:30 in the morning. Pretty close. So, um, so that's how we got involved in Ukraine. We didn't pivot to Ukraine. We expanded to Ukraine. We still have teams on the ground in Afghanistan as I'm talking to you right now, and I'm planning an operation very soon in Afghanistan for another couple of things while I'm in Ukraine.
Are you able to give any details about what you're planning in Afghanistan, or is that not something you can discuss right now?
Nope. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. The Taliban are dangerous and scary.
I completely agree with that sentiment. What are the main differences for Project Dynamo in operating in Ukraine and then operating in Afghanistan?
The biggest thing is the enemy is fundamentally different. It's what's the difference between a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, and the South Bronx. Fundamentally different places and cultures and capabilities and thought processes, loyalties. You know, it's one of the problems that we have in Ukraine is, yeah, and we saw it to some degree in Afghanistan, but it's really highlighted in Ukraine during Ukrainian operations. You have a lot of guys that are tied to Afghanistan because of their service and our combat time there, but actually don't know how to do rescue operations. Right? You just, but we know enough about Afghanistan where a lot of guys can make some things happen and get some things going, especially if there's some networks on the ground and stuff. You can really get things going, and that's great. In Ukraine, it's a fundamentally different problem set. There is no such thing as a Green Beret or a Navy SEAL in the U.S. arsenal that's had to worry about cruise missiles or bad guy drones, right? Or artillery fire, or subversion and sedition, or the Russian intelligence service, or bad guys that look and sound just like us. Those are all problems that we've had today. Cruise missiles landed, missile landed about 300 meters right from my window right here a few hours ago. So we, you know, it's a much, much, much different threat picture that, frankly, most American soldiers, with all of our combat time and all of our experience and all of our stuff, actually, most people are completely unprepared for this war. We don't have to ever worry about stuff falling from the sky. That's usually our job. That's usually us. That's not the case in Ukraine. We don't have to worry about artillery ever. That's usually us, or mortars, or tanks, or any of those kinds of things. Taliban never had any of that stuff. Not in a meaningful way. For perspective, we lost like 7,000 guys over 20 years in two major war zones, Iraq and Afghanistan. there's Africa's in there too, sprinkled in, and some North Africa, some of those things, Libya, Yemen, some of those places sprinkled in there. So, but about 7,000. The Ukrainians have lost 121,000 in 11 weeks. That's half the size of the Marine Corps. That's killed in action. Wounded in action, 8x. So call that a million. That's about the size of the standing U.S. Army.
That's an incredible amount of loss to be.
So when you in 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 12 months, we lost 7,000 in 20 years. So just to give you an idea of the scope and the scale of the difference in war is fundamentally different.
That's amazing. When you are in Ukraine, are you still looking for American citizens? Is that your primary effort right now, is getting more American citizens and green card holders out of Ukraine, or are you focused on a slightly different problem set there?
In Ukraine, we have different flavors of operations. American citizens will always be our priority, wherever that may be. Be it Afghanistan stuff, be it Ukraine stuff, be it China, Taiwan stuff, which we're building out infrastructure there as we speak as well. Americans are our priority, always will be our priority, our priority. Very close second to them will be LPRs. That said, if I can rescue innocent people, we have a whole handicap program out here for blind people, deaf people. We have a Holocaust survivor program out here for Holocaust survivors that are stuck, they're very old, elderly. We have a medevac program out here. Ukraine, because we built all of our infrastructure. I was here a month before the war. So the war started February 24th. I was here almost a month before. So all the places that you see on TV that are really terrible, we were in all those places way before they were terrible. They made it yet. The war hadn't started. So we built all this infrastructure all over the place, gaming the game as to how the war would be, and to a large extent, we were pretty accurate. So that allows us to be extremely effective. Extremely effective. With respect to Americans, we've done everything from break Americans out of jail that were arrested for espionage, all the way to include just getting people from where they are to where they need to be and getting them to Poland in a minivan. We've done 68 American babies under the age of a month old from the occupied areas out, which is pretty amazing.
That's incredible. What do those operations entail? What do you require when you're moving infants and small kids?
There's two big pieces to those operations. One is the tactical execution piece and the tradecraft piece and all the don't get caught, don't get killed stuff. And then there's the administrative part, which actually looks a lot like Afghanistan because there is no U.S. embassy in Ukraine. So how do you take a baby, a newborn baby, and get them from a sovereign country called Ukraine? How do you get them from an occupied area called Russian-occupied Ukraine through a war zone, through the front lines, all the way through a war zone in a sovereign country called Ukraine, through a border to a country called Poland without a passport, and no good way to get a passport either in Ukraine. It's very similar to the Afghanistan problem set in that regard. Is how you can't get a passport mailed to you. So how do you cross the border?
How do you cross the border?
You cross.
Yeah. I think after listening to this, you might be getting a lot of questions from Afghans who want some help getting passports since the Taliban are running those offices, and it's very difficult to do that.
Understanding that all these operations have a tactical piece, an execution piece, and also an administrative piece. Well, Dynamo never breaks the law. We actually did operate. We've we've done operations inside Russia. In Thanksgiving last year, 2022, there were 2 American babies that got stuck in a Russian state-run orphanage in St. Petersburg, Russia. They were born on September 5th. State Department and the U.S. government tried for like 90 days trying to make something happen. They couldn't do it. The family got connected with us through a friend of theirs. And we had their kids in their arms in like 9 days, 10 days.
That's
from
incredible.
Russia.
That's incredible. And what were the big impediments for you in doing that? I mean, what was standing in your way that you had to get through?
There's always challenges. It's just understanding how things work, how people work, what needs to happen, and being motivated. Dynamo enjoys a 100% success rate. Every single American that we have sought to rescue, we rescue. These are American that are in a rush with inaccurate birth certificate, no passport.
Bryan, can you hear me? Hey, Bryan, we lost you for a minute. Can you come back to what you were saying about no birth certificate?
There we go. I'm back. I'm sorry. It's on my end.
It's on my end.
No worries. If you can pick up, you were talking about birth certificates, American
Yeah.
citizens, as long as you have a birth certificate.
So these kids are born to a Ukrainian surrogate mother. Genetically they're American. The surrogate and they're twins, Elizabeth and Benjamin. The surrogate mother was in the Donbass, meaning behind enemy lines. She's a Ukrainian citizen, and there's American babies in her belly. And the family is from Dallas, right outside Dallas. She flees south into Crimea, makes her way north into St. Petersburg, gives birth, and then disappears. Now, there's 2 American babies abandoned in St. Petersburg with not a single piece of paper. How do you prove that they're Americans in the first place? And where do you begin? And they're sitting in Texas right now. You can meet them.
That's really incredible that you were able to do that and do it all legally, which I think is the big. I've run into people who have advocated for some illegal behaviors in Afghanistan, and I've always been very firm with anybody who asks me to do things legally, because any extra legal behavior is just going to add hurdles to jump through when you're trying to work a process that you had underway. So I'm glad to hear that you guys are always keeping above board.
Most of the people that suggest that are really motivated people. But General Patton said enthusiasm doesn't equal competence. So again, right? There's this group of so-called. They claim to be former U.S. military special operations guys. They're not, and these guys are morons. What they do is they get you into Pakistan, and they smuggle you into Pakistan as an former Afghan American interpreter. So that's cool. So now you're in Pakistan illegally. That's great. the ISI and the Fez, just like in our country, that's a crime. Now I just gave them all the reason they need to hurt you and mess with you. And torture your family and rape your wife and who knows what. Because you have now knowingly broken the law and you have ties to their perceived bad guys, which is us. Why would I want to put an ally in that position of vulnerability? Generally speaking, the people that advocate for that are people who are not on the street themselves. I know I wouldn't want to be with a group of people that I'm smuggling into Pakistan, and then I get caught because I'll go to jail with them. Doesn't sound great to me. So a lot of these groups out there that advocate for these ideas are people who don't know how to do these kind of operations. They don't actually put their own skin in the game. They're not on the street doing it themselves. If you ask them to break the law, they'll tell you no.
Right. Absolutely. I think that's why it's so important that you have been repeatedly on the ground in these situations, understanding what the fear is. And I hear it every day. I mean, every day my inbox is full of Afghans begging me to get them out because they're terrified. Their father was killed. They're living just in a horrifying situation, and they're looking for any way to get out. And I imagine that the situation is similar in Ukraine because it's a different threat, like you say, but it is a very scary threat. And, people don't want to have something bad happen to them. They want anything to save them, but I think it's really important to do that the right way. And especially in regards to Pakistan, there are so many people I know who've sent Afghan families to Pakistan, and then those families can't support themselves, even if they do it legally. It's very expensive to support yourself in Pakistan. There's still the issue of the visa, which will run out, and now the Pakistan government is deporting people back to Afghanistan. So there's just so many levels of complication in this effort, and it sounds like you guys are dealing with them all beautifully and able to, help together. More than 3,000 in Afghanistan, more than 3,000 in Ukraine, and that those are each of those lives is like a small world. That you are saving. I do want to ask one more question. When you're working with the Taliban, especially because the people that you're helping are generally American citizens or green card holders, are the Taliban standing in the way of your work, or are you able to kind of work with them or around them because of the nature of the people that you're helping?
We do not work with the Taliban. To say that we're have a relationship with them is incorrect. Generally speaking, if the Taliban know that we're coming, when I'm on the streets of Afghanistan, I'm scared of getting my head chopped off. I only move around at night. I do all kinds of tricks and tactics so that I don't get caught. That I won't get into. But to say that they're supportive is wholly incorrect. I guess I have no idea what their position is, but I'm also going to find out. I guess that's a better way of saying it.
So they're not allowing you to come in any capacity. They don't know that you're coming in. Like you're just doing things there and trying to avoid them.
Yeah, they. Now, having said that, we have figured out a few fun ways to get landing clearances where other people can't. So, as an example, we got the first landing clearance of the Taliban in Kabul. So while everyone was trying to do charter planes and couldn't quite get there, and people landing planes couldn't take off, and all these other crazy stories. We didn't have that problem. It took us a minute to pull it off, but we landed planes September 17th or 18th or something like that. And we got we landed the first airplane in Afghanistan and also took off. There were a whole bunch of people that were able to get planes on the ground. Once they got there, they couldn't leave, which was not winning. We were able to go. We were able to land, take off, and do the whole thing, and went to Chicago. So again, no refugee camp. We didn't go through humanitarian city. We didn't sit and get processed for 9 months. Some State Department intern figured out how to do things. We didn't do that. We went Kabul all the way, whole enchilada, all the way to America, and we were the first ones to really do that.
That's really incredible work. Well, how many people are still on your rosters to help in Afghanistan and then in Ukraine separately?
I don't know. That's a database question. We have on our website, which is where you can donate, projectdynamo.org. There's the big red donate button. Right under that is our evacuation request button that loads our database. I haven't checked in a while. We were at 20,000, 25,000, something like that. But most of those, for Afghanistan, most of those are kind of the SIV thing, where it's one registration equals 10 people. So it's a unfair number.
Wow. So there are plenty of people who you're tracking who still need help. And maybe some of them might be on CARES list, and maybe some of them might be,
yeah, I'm sure.
U.S. Refugee Admissions Program applicants.
Yeah.
So maybe
I'm sure
there's lots of
duplication. But
I'm sure after this, you're going to have a lot more people who are going to be registering.
And I'm limited by funding. I mean, that's it. We are really. It is a terrible thing to have to say, wish I could help you, I just can't afford it. Really wish I could. I have to have that conversation at this point daily. There's Americans that I can't afford to get out. Let alone allies.
Are you covering?
Let alone allies.
Sure. Are you covering their expenses in Afghanistan and Ukraine, or are you solely focused on the expense of getting them out to safety?
Tough question. We focus on their expenses while they're stuck. Pursuant to us getting them out. So think of it as a mousetrap. Once you enter in the mousetrap, you get spit out on the other end free. All the things that happen in the middle of that, we control, we pay for, we finance and everything else, and we control. But that's not like 7 months of rent or food or whatever. That's safe houses. It tends to be very short.
That's good. That probably helps, because I know how much, especially veterans groups in Afghanistan, their funding has just been sapped by the constant need to provide food, safe houses, and all these things as they wait for evacuations that are just not coming with the speed that they need to come at. So what should our listeners know about the situations that you're working to improve in Ukraine and Afghanistan right now?
What should they know? They should know that the need is real for organizations like Dynamo. There's a bunch of really good organizations out there that are like ours or similar to ours. There are 10 times as many, though, that are frankly self-serving money pits. So what I would say is do your due diligence. Donate to us if you can. If you don't want to for any reason, that's okay. Donate to somebody, but when you make that donation, donate to someone that is real. Just because someone's a Green Beret doesn't mean they're actually doing anything real. Lots of really shady shenanigans happen on both worlds. With respect to the need is very real in both places and not going away anytime soon. The war in Afghanistan is alive and well. The war in Ukraine is really alive and well. I got shot at today. I took missile fire today. I took artillery fire today. So this war is definitely not ending anytime soon. And if I were a betting man, which I'm not, but if I were, the war in Ukraine gets much worse, significantly worse, before it gets better. We haven't seen anything yet. And if you're an American
And if you're an American,
if you're American in Ukraine and the occupied
if
areas,
you're American in Ukraine and the occupied areas,
if you're a woman, you're definitely raped. If you're a man, you're probably raped,
if you're
and
a man, you're
100%
probably
tortured and
raped, and
electrocuted and all
100%
kinds of stuff.
tortured and electrocuted and all kinds of stuff.
I get a lot of people talking about, well, this
I
isn't
get a
an
lot of people
American
talking
problem.
about, well, this isn't an
I'll
American
tell you that
problem.
if you're an American out
I will
here,
tell you that if you're an
you are the
American out
enemy
here,
and they will hunt
you
you
are
and
the
kill
enemy
you.
and they will hunt
This
you
is
and kill you.
They look at us as the enemy.
They
and we
look
need to
at
look
us
at
as
them
the
as the enemy
enemy.
too,
We
and
need to
that's
look at
okay.
them as the enemy too, and that's okay.
As an American
As an American
citizen and veteran and patriot,
citizen and
if
veteran
you're
and patriot,
anti-rape, if you're anti-kill babies,
anti-rape,
if you're
if you're
anti-blow up
anti-kill
schools, if you're
babies, if you're anti-blow up
anti-target
schools, if you're
hospitals, if you're
anti-target hospitals, if you're
civilian infrastructure, blowing up civilian infrastructure, poisoning water, and chemical weapons in some probable cases, and you're pro-sovereignty, then you should support this war.
then you should support this war.
I don't necessarily care about Ukraine per se.
I don't necessarily care about Ukraine
But as
per
an
se.
American, we have values, and we can either watch genocide on TV, or we can do something about it.
Or we could do something about it.
And as Americans, it's not a Democrat-Republican thing.
It's not a Democrat-Republican thing.
But I have personally myself debriefed over 400 victims of rape, starting at 11 years old. And that was a boy.
Was this all in Ukraine, or is this throughout your...
Ukraine. That's all Ukraine.
That's all Ukraine.
So
I've heard about it under the Taliban too. It's a
Yeah.
horrible tool of war and oppression.
So if you as an American say rape is bad, which if you don't say that, then we have words. That every Republican I know would say rape is bad. Every Democrat I know will say rape is bad. One of those, we're Americans and we reject this principle because we're Americans. And then by default, people that are being subjected to that, we should try and help if we can. And we should.
Yeah. Are there any other ways that people can support Project Dynamo outside? Let's say they don't have the funds to support right now, but they want to do something. Do you need volunteers? What else can people do?
Awareness. I have somebody who does our social media stuff. I don't know how to do any of that. I'm not that guy. No one knew who I was 19 months ago, and I liked it that way. Doing podcasts. At 3 o'clock in the morning. Our Facebook and our LinkedIn and our Instagram and all that. Part of both of these wars is the war of ideas and information, and kind of punching the bad guys in the face a little bit with one Instagram post at a time, which oddly hurts them more effectively than most people realize. So following us and sharing, following us is one thing, and sharing our stuff is helpful both in the information operations war and spreading the good word, and also helps us with fundraising. Also, fundraising and awareness are tied together. So for huge help if people are listening.
Well, that's awesome. And we're going to have all of those links in our show notes. So anyone who's looking for various ways to promote Project Dynamo, support, we're going to have links to all of that. And before we close up tonight, I want to do what we always do at the Afghanistan Project Podcast, which is to make sure that we're giving voice to the people of Afghanistan about the ordeals that they've undergone during almost 2 decades of war and their country's tumultuous return to Taliban rule. So today we're sharing the story of an Afghan man whom we're calling Ahmadi. Ahmadi worked with numerous foreign governments, including the U.S. government, and he's received a number of threats before and after the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan because of his work. He's now living in terrible insecurity, apart from his family. He's got a case underway with Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, and he's applied for assistance from the EU and from the Australian government, but he remains under threat in Afghanistan and has no foreseeable plans or ability to get out. So this is Ahmadi's story in his own words. I am part of an Afghan family who has spent a bad life in Afghanistan and asked help from many countries. I've shared all my contracts, warning letters, and HR letters, but I did not receive any support and help from now from them, and now I am in hiding in Afghanistan somewhere far from my family. My family is using the money which I collected during my jobs in the past regime. Now this money will be finished, and I do not have any other source to support my family. My family is not spending a normal life in Afghanistan. These are the threats which I've faced up to now. I received a phone call on January 21st, 2021 from unknown sources. They threatened me, "We know you are working with infidel people. If you've not left your job, we will kidnap your child and cut their head off and throw it in front of your house." I again got a phone call on March 25th, 2021 from unknown sources who threatened me, "This is your last warning. If you do not leave your job, we will throw a hand grenade at your house." I received a few text messages after days of calling from the same, with the same threats that were in the phone call. Finally, I gave a report to the police about all of this history. The police got my SIM card, and then the government of Afghanistan found this group of people. Now the group has come with the Taliban and searched to find me and kill me. The third time I received a warning letter at my home. The Taliban wrote that first I must arrest myself, and if I did not arrest myself, they would find and kill me in front of my family. But I kept myself silent. This, by the way, the third threat was received during the Taliban's return to power. Finally, the Taliban again sent me a warning letter and wrote during the letter that in the past regime, I had given reports to the government, and the government killed 12 of our intelligent and strong fighter Taliban in a certain area, which I won't name. Therefore, now we will order the Taliban to find you and kill you in the place where they find you. Since the Taliban have gotten power, I haven't been able to go home. I have been hidden in a house somewhere in Afghanistan. The Taliban came to our home and asked my family about my address, but they told them, "We do not know where he is." And they gave my family a verbal warning. Also, many times the Taliban came to my home and asked my wife about my location, but she never shared with them where I was living. A few days ago, they came to our house and told my wife to pass the message to her husband to arrest himself to the Taliban. Otherwise, they would find and kill him in front of her eyes. My wife was scared and called me and said, "Do not come home because the Taliban are looking for you and they want to kill you." Hence, my life is full of risk and not safe here in Afghanistan. Please put me on an evacuation list. Evacuate me as soon as possible. Otherwise, I am 100% sure that one day they will find and kill me. We want to thank Ahmadi for sharing that story with us for our listeners. His is one of many stories I've heard about the threats that the Taliban are making to the people who worked against them in the Afghan government. And for any other Afghans who would like to have a story considered for a future episode, send us a detailed letter with as much detail as you're comfortable sharing, and let us know if you need to remain anonymous to protect your identity. You can send that correspondence to our show address, which is the Afghanistan Project Podcast at gmail.com. Bryan, I want to thank you so much for being here to talk with us about Project Dynamo's work to bring Americans home from dangerous locations, especially at 3 o'clock in the morning from Ukraine while you're in the middle of an active war zone.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Beth. I really appreciate it. Happy to be on again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Beth. I really appreciate it. Happy to be on again if you want.
Yeah, there are so many things. I know we'd like to do a roundtable one day about how Afghans can stay secure in Afghanistan, and it sounds like you would probably be a really good person to be involved in that. So, guys, keep tuning in. We want to thank all of our listeners for sharing their time and supporting the people of Afghanistan and Ukraine. Tasha Kaur, and we hope to see you again soon.